former Health Secretary Stephen Dorrell. Stephen Dorrell, a very good morning to you. First of all, I wonder what you make of these WhatsApp messages and what do they tell us, do you think, about the government's handling of the pandemic?
Well, first of all, the tone of individual messages is obviously extremely regrettable. But I think there's a much more fundamental issue here, which is what it tells us about the way that the government was making decisions at that time. Nobody pretends that was easy, but the fact that it was a fast-moving situation seems to me that it actually emphasises the need for proper process in government decision-making. The Blair government, if you remember, came under fire for what was called sofa government, informal decision-making. And it's exactly the same thing, it seems to me, that is being revealed here in these messages as the way in which the Johnson government was making decisions at a time of when those decisions were of huge importance to many millions of families.
Matt Hancock, as you might imagine, is pretty unhappy about this. He's described it as being a biased account to suit an anti-lockdown agenda. He's making the point this is a partial picture. This is the release of messages from one person, albeit an important person at the time of the pandemic, as the Health Secretary. But there's no details here of all the other meetings and decision-making that would have gone on.
I think that's completely fair. And that's part of the reason why I regret the fact that the official inquiry into the government's handling of the circumstances at the beginning of the pandemic has been so long delayed. It was a conscious political decision, once again, by the Johnson government to project the inquiry into the future so that its conclusions wouldn't be published before the general election. Now, it just doesn't seem to me that it stands up for a member of that government to put the inquiry into the future and then say, oh, but this is biased. I absolutely agree that what we need is a proper and timely, it's already late, but the sooner the better, inquiry into the way in which these key decisions were being made from what we can see from these texts. As I said, it was another manifestation of sofa government, and we know those methods don't work.
Matt Hancock has made the point, hasn't he, that the public inquiry is the place for these WhatsApp messages. He's saying he's been completely transparent with that inquiry. Do you think that's right and that we should wait for that to run its course, or do you have concerns about the pace of the inquiry?
I absolutely have concerns about the pace of the inquiry. I have said many times, I think that it's important that this inquiry works quickly and examines all the evidence. Matt Hancock's right to say the only piece of evidence we're focusing on these text messages or WhatsApp messages, but there is what we can't see is the full range of material available to ministers when they were making decisions. But what we can see from these WhatsApp messages is the way in which ministers were reaching decisions and some of the prejudices that were being advanced during a decision-making process. That, I think, is extremely regrettable.
Given that you're worried about how long the inquiry has taken, are you grateful then that these WhatsApp messages have been published?
Well, I think that I'm not sure who it was who said it, but I think it's true that what this reveals is that Isabel Oakeshott is a good journalist, but a bad friend.
And more generally, do you have worries about what this story tells us and the fact that it's in the public domain? Do you think that it could be corrosive to good government if government ministers are worried all the time that any messages that they have between them might end up in the public domain?
No, I don't think that's a legitimate worry. Quite the contrary. I think ministers are public officials, and when they're making decisions on behalf of the public, they should engage in a properly disciplined process where the argument, and that's particularly true in a fast-moving situation such as we had at the beginning of the pandemic. I emphasize, I'm not suggesting remotely that these were easy decisions, but that should have made the proper process more important, not less important.
Was it a mistake for Matt Hancock to hand over the WhatsApp messages to a journalist? Why do you think he did that?
Well, we know why he did it. We did it because he wanted to have a story written for his book, and she helped him ghostwrite that story. Now, to do that and to hand over material to a journalist and expect a journalist not to use it to pursue their professional journalistic obligation, actually, seems to me naive in the extreme.
I wonder if I could just get your reaction to the news that the senior civil servant, Sue Gray, could be moving to be Sir Keir Starmer's chief of staff. Do you think that's an appropriate move? What do you make of it?
Well, actually, I think there's a very strong linkage between these two stories, because the public's only ever heard of Sue Gray because of because of her focus on proper process within government. And if Keir Starmer is appointing Sue Gray as his chief of staff, I take that as a very strong signal that Keir Starmer is committed to proper process in government in a way that Boris Johnson never was.
And yet Boris Johnson and his supporters are saying that this is not an appropriate move. They say, well, let me quote Jacob Rees-Mogg, who tweeted, "So much for an impartial civil service. The Gray report now looks like a left-wing stitch-up against a Tory PM." Do you think this hardens Boris Johnson's argument about Partygate? Does it mean he's more likely to make a quick return?
No, I don't think it does. But I think what it does do is underline Keir Starmer's commitment. It's evidence of Keir Starmer's commitment to a different way of managing government business. And that's something I think every citizen of this country should welcome.
Well, Stephen Dorrell, we appreciate your time this morning. Thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.